you're deeply invested in Palantir, in military technology, in technologies of surveillance, in technologies of warfare. It just seems to me that when you tell me a story about the Antichrist coming to power, I feel like that Antichrist would maybe be using the tools that you were building, right?
I obviously don't think that that's what I'm doing.
It's Ken Harbaugh with the MeidasTouch Network. There is something deeply unsettling about this interview. I watched the whole thing so you don't have to, and my takeaway is that the looming oligarchy that the Trump regime is trying to create is going to be so much worse than we imagine, because the key players aren't like the oligarchs of the past who focused on building commercial empires. These tech and media tycoons are fanatical. Their belief systems are so bizarre that it's hard to even describe them, and they have more power than just about any small group in American history. My guest today is someone you all know. Kris Goldsmith's day job is tracking extremists and fascists, and that work has forced him to study these new American oligarchs. I'll say that again. One of our nation's foremost researchers of extremism is now focusing a significant amount of his attention on the richest, most powerful men in America. I will let our conversation take it from there. Welcome to the Ken Harbaugh Show. I've got Kris Goldsmith back, the founder and CEO of Task Force Butler and Veterans Fighting Fascism. Speaks for itself. I asked Kris to pick the topic for the day, and he didn't disappoint. It's a little apocalyptic, but Peter Thiel as the Antichrist. I mean, we know this guy's always been a little weird and extreme in his delusions of grandeur and this idea that he's a singular figure in human history. And his obsession with the Antichrist is particularly strange, illuminated for us.
Yeah. And so part of the reason that Peter Thiel is in the news right now is because he sat down with a columnist for the New York Times, Ross Douthat. I think that what this illustrates for the average person versus what it illustrates for someone like me who studies fringe ideologies, like we have two completely different takeaways. Someone who doesn't read about extremism and how extremists use history and theology and unique interpretations of philosophy to justify beliefs that are genocidal or eugenic in nature, they're going to hear this guy. And if they're impressed with Joe Rogan's like philosophy or philosophizing, like they're going to be impressed with Peter Thiel. These guys all kind of share this idea that contrarianism is equivalent to intelligence. And I am someone who says this because I was there once too. Before I went to college, before I started studying things like economics and history and philosophy and politics, every time that I found every time I had some new revelation in something that I was doing my own research on, I felt like I was the smartest motherfucker in the room. I hadn't yet reached the point where I had studied enough to realize I don't know anything. And until you have that humbling moment, you're not really making much progress. And Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, the rest of these billionaire philosophers have reached a point where no one is around to tell them, no, you got it wrong. You're fucking stupid. There's a lot of scholarship on this and you're just wrong. So when a guy like Peter Thiel reads the Bible, he interprets it so that he is a prophet. He compares himself in many ways to living beyond humanity, and all the rest of us are just peons. Now, why does this matter? Most people have never heard of Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel is the guy who backed J.D. Vance's entire political career, and before that, his career. Like, Peter Thiel's his mentor. He's the guy who gave him his first real job. He's the guy who bought him a Senate seat. He is the single biggest donor to J.D. Vance. And J.D. Vance has also adopted this theocratic, apocalyptic, kind of somewhat eugenicist worldview that now matters to all of us because these people have seized power.
Yeah. Well, one of J.D. Vance's, we did a bit on this. It's been a couple months now, but one of his go-to Silicon Valley pseudo-philosophers is Curtis Yarvin, who is now just out in the open pushing for monarchy. This idea that democracy is decadent and doomed to fail, and the only way to save our civilization is to put all of our power, this is going to sound really familiar, into the hands of a single strong individual. How convenient that they just happen to have bankrolled the individuals that they're talking about.
Yeah, it is really convenient that these folks believe that all of their investments are the tools to extend their own lives and thereby extending humanity. Like, the problem with these people is everything that they read that they feel like is really smart and that are important texts, whether they are nonfiction, fiction, religious, philosophical, whatever, they get like the opposite take of what they're supposed to. And they think because it's contrarian, because it's different from everybody else, they're now the smartest person in the room. So they read something like any of the books behind me from like ancient philosophers like Plato. And they look at like the cradles of the ideas of democracy and civilization. And they think they can't get beyond the most basic concepts in philosophy.
Hey, it's Ken Harbaugh. Quick break to say thank you to everyone who's been following and supporting this show and this channel. None of it happens without you. And if you haven't yet subscribed to my Substack page, I'd really appreciate the follow. It's a great way to make sure you never miss an episode. It's free to sign up. And if you're able to pitch in a few bucks, every dollar goes back into the show. Just search for The Ken Harbaugh Show on Substack or click the link below. Thanks.
These conversations that these tech bros are having out in the open on podcasts and have been forever, they seem harmless until you realize that like Peter Thiel is the biggest backer of Palantir. Palantir is the basically law enforcement spyware that is being employed by the U.S. military and by all of the largest law enforcement agencies domestically. And this one single man is a lot like Elon Musk in that he controls so much of our data that he could decide to basically turn things off, to make opportunities not available for some of us or to persecute some of us. We have reached a point when these singular individuals who are batshit crazy, who like, I don't know what Thiel's drug regimen is, if he has one, but like Elon Musk is constantly taking drugs that make him hallucinate. And they are in positions of power, unelected, but beyond powerful nonetheless.
Well, the suggestion that they could just turn stuff off at a whim isn't hypothetical. Elon Musk literally did that to Starlink when Ukraine was about to use it to launch attacks on the Russian fleet, which was bombarding Ukrainian cities. And unilaterally, he decided that he knew better and he was going to stop the Ukrainians from defending themselves that way. So they have that power now. They have used it. When you add AI to that and surveillance and Peter Thiel's control over that, it's truly a terrifying prospect. When I listen to him and his buddies and even J.D. Vance, I get the feeling, well, I reminisce about like my freshman common room in college, and they seem to be stuck there, right? They seem to have never evolved beyond that. And this conversation is perfectly timed because an hour ago, I talked to a forensic psychiatrist, Bandy Lee, who issued the first mental warning about Donald Trump. And we had a conversation about what happens when a personality like that, and I think Peter Thiel is cut from the same cloth. What happens when the normal societal inhibitions are removed, when all of the structures that exist to temper the worst impulses of people like that, they invert and they start to reinforce their impulses? And so instead of, in the case of Donald Trump, a person with his sociopathic narcissistic tendencies in normal society would have disincentives for being cruel and narcissistic. When you achieve the kind of power that he and Peter Thiel and J.D. Vance have, all of those tendencies become heightened, right? They become reinforced. Yeah. You're rewarded for being cruel. You're rewarded for being a narcissist. And I think that's kind of the place that Peter Thiel finds himself in as well.
Yeah. And Peter Thiel and the rest of these tech oligarchs have been pushing for the idea of what they call freedom cities. That's what Trump brands them as. That's just rebranding company towns. And people who've studied history and like the unionization movement in the United States, and the old oil and railroad barons, they know what a company town does, right? It creates its own laws. It makes it so that people are effectively, indentured servants to the company or to the company's board. In the case of, these massive investors like Peter Thiel, right? They are. This is not just an idea. They're not just talking about this on podcasts. They're not just talking about
property. Thousands of acres in California.
Yeah, both inside the United States and outside the United States. They have already effectively accomplished some of these new company towns in other countries in Latin America, where now the country's government has realized that it's got a runaway nation state within its own borders that they can't really control, because these barons control, their access to things like natural resources and capital, money that these governments, that these countries rely on. And that is what they are trying to do within the United States. This isn't just, an idea that's being discussed. It was a campaign promise that Donald Trump made videos about creating freedom cities. We do not want to go back to living in company towns where CEOs determine, what your housing was, not just how much you get paid, but, whether or not you're able to sleep at night.
That was part one of my conversation with Kris Goldsmith, and part two out next week. We dive into the bizarre worldview of these oligarchs that sees immortality as the ultimate human achievement, not relationships or love or defense of the planet, but living forever. It's truly weird, and they really buy into it. Kris unpacks it all. Stay tuned. Thanks.
New Midas merch drop! Check out the latest pro-democracy sticker packs, t-shirts, hats, sweatshirts, and more, all at store.MeidasTouch.com.